Okay, so we're here at Headstream Studio with an actual legend, François K, a man who's worn many hats in the music industry over the years. DJ, producer, remixer, mixer, A&R, label owner. How are you? Welcome to Bali. Welcome to Potato Head. How was your set at Climax on Saturday night?
I guess the best way I could say it was climactic.
Okay, that's good. That's a good seal of approval. So over the years, you played in some of the most iconic club venues ever, Studio 54, The Loft, Paradise Garage. How did Climax compare?
It's very much in line with some of the values that we've always appreciated, and that goes on many levels, whether it's the environment, the sound system, the care in which everything is treated. So for all those reasons, it not only felt very comfortable, but it felt quite natural.
Okay, that's nice. So, and how about the booth?
That's part of it.
Yeah, a big part of it.
Yes, except that, there were no private bathrooms in the booth at the Paradise Garage or anywhere else for that matter, but that's a nice addition.
That was one that Harvey insisted on, I believe. So this isn't your first time in Bali, is it?
No.
And when do you remember the first time you came here?
Approximately 2005 or something like that.
Okay, so I imagine it's changed quite a lot. What's your experience like of Bali? Do you enjoy your time here? Have you connected with the island much outside of the gigs you've been doing?
I never stay at, commercial hotels or on the coast in general. I always go to see our friends in Ubud and steer completely clear of the entire touristic industry aspect of it. I just much prefer the real Indonesian side of the island.
Okay, that's good. And any highlights for this trip so far? Like, when did you arrive? You've been here for a week in total?
Pretty much.
Yeah. So what did you get up to on this trip outside of Potato Head?
I did a stream here for 6 hours 2 days ago.
Oh, nice.
Prepared for the gigs at Climax, and that was it.
Excellent. So yeah, I was there for the first.
I didn't really have time to do anything else. I'm sorry.
That
was
okay.
Really paramount on my mind. So
yeah, for sure. I was there for the first few hours of the set. I had to get home to my newborn baby, but I loved it. It was super eclectic going through the gears. And I know that like you're a DJ who doesn't stick to any given genre. How important is it to you, or how do you view genre? Because I feel like it's something that you kind of, your music I would describe as genre defying.
Well, I think it's up to each and every one of us to set artificial boundaries as to what we feel we should be expressing and sharing with audiences. And obviously, it very much depends on what crowd a DJ is playing for. So, because I knew quite a lot about what Climax was supposed to be about, and I'm reasonably good mates with Harvey, as well as familiar with his approach, since not only have I played with him at many other gigs, but I've also had him as a guest at my own residency at Deep Space in New York. I'm pretty sure I have a reasonable fix on what he would expect people who are invited to play in his club to contribute. And in my mind, I'm sure that what Harvey is looking for is people who can carry this sort of tradition of eclecticism while still entertaining the crowd and being able to take them through unexpected turns. And I just think it's pretty natural for us to do this. We've been doing it for a very long time. That being the case, it should be noted that it really isn't the approach I would take when I play for a more commercial or mainstream crowd in Bali and other venues, because I don't think that this would be what they expect me to do at all. It's just a question of, as people refer to, TPO, time, place, occasion. So it all depends. It's all variable.
All variable. So you mentioned Deep Space and obviously the Body and Soul. Forgive me, I don't know, is Body and Soul still running?
We just did a bunch of festival gigs this year, besides celebrating our own 28th anniversary in New York City in July. Right. We also played all over the place in Switzerland, Japan, Netherlands, Finland, and there's more coming up. I mean, we're very busy and very in demand, actually.
That's great. So when you take the Body and Soul show on the road, does it affect? Obviously, you mentioned playing for the crowd is an important aspect of what we do, of course, of what you do. When you have Body and Soul in New York City, does it differ much from when you take it on the road, or is it essentially the same essence of the music that you give across?
I think by now we've clearly defined what it is that we stand for, and we don't really compromise very much when it comes to catering. We feel that when we do a Body and Soul show, people would know what to expect, and we pretty much give them what they know Body and Soul is supposed to be about.
And then, so Deep Space obviously was a slightly different sound associated to that. And who were some of the guest DJs you invited, for the people who wouldn't be familiar with this? So you mentioned DJ Harvey, but you've had people like Mad Professor. They're like super eclectic.
Yeah. I mean, Deep Space is about dub.
Yeah.
Not reggae dub, but just dub as an aesthetic, as an approach, and as a way to treat music and present it. So I would invite people from Giles Peterson to Mala or Koki or Joy Orbison, or, from the more dubstep camp, because dubstep happened while Deep Space was ongoing, as much as we had, Juan Atkins or Carl Craig, or, we invited so many people. We had, I guess we were the first people in New York to bring Mark Ernestus and Morris Van Oswald as rhythm and sound at the time. The list goes on and on. I've had multiple times guests like vocalist Muta Baruka, or we had U-Roy when he was still around from Jamaica. We had, Adrian Sherwood. We had Pinch. We had Quiet Village, where it's just like it goes on and on. I'm talking about literally, over the course of 16 years of weekly residencies. But, again, the point there is a little bit different from what people are used to today, because when Deep Space was going on, we kind of wound down in 2018 because Cielo, the club where we were doing it at, was unfortunately not able to renew their lease, so they stopped. And this used to be about a DJ residency where I was there pretty much every week. I think now things have changed and people are not interested in supporting residencies. I'm talking about a large majority of people. They don't even know what a resident DJ is. They're more like bees flying between flowers and picking different pollen, and they're more appearing to be interested in having someone different every week. So it kind of, having all these different guests all the time breaks the continuity, and it seems to not allow for the same building up of a community that was happening in older times, where because people would make a habit of coming to a venue and listening to the same person and trusting that person's musical taste to introduce them with new music and so on. I think there was a different type of connection, and now it seems a lot of people are, as dance music has scaled up to larger numbers, it's also gone down in quality, in my opinion. And part of that is people are just more interested in the fleeting, temporary rush rather than the long-term building of something that is perhaps more potent. Now, you know, obviously over the course of 16 years of residency, I was able to do that. But we could, at the end, towards like 2014, 15, and so on, with the advent of social media sensationalism and the rise of a different class of people calling themselves influencers, I think it gave way to a sort of superficiality, a superficial approach that seemed to resonate with people who clearly didn't have time to be vested into being part of the community. They would just come, buy a ticket, experience whatever was going on, and then move on without really having any kind of attachment to any kind of what we call the regulars. And the point about Climax is that it seems to me that the way the place is designed is far, far more conducive to encouraging such practices to take place. In other words, I realize that no matter what, there's going to be a percentage of people who come here who are only here on holiday because they don't live in Bali. But it seems that compared to most of the other clubs that I've seen on the island, this one has more welcoming qualities, which are going to make it possible over the course of time to create these bonds, to create that situation where people might come and then return just because they want to see certain things happen at Climax. I know, for example, that when the setting is just right, as it is over there, in my case at least, and therefore I have to assume for other people like myself, being in such an environment elicits a better performance out of us.
Interesting.
Well, that's it. Everything is part of the environment. Things don't exist in a vacuum or theoretically. There are, you know, so many factors that come into play with that, but you know, you might want to willfully ignore them for the sake of cheap short-term sensationalism. But I happen to not really be impressed with a lot of these quote unquote, you know, influencer shows that I see on social media, where you see a lot of people fist pumping and just going like, you know, it's great that they're into that. And there's a catharsis going on. They're all like vibing together for that moment of peak intensity. But I think by doing that, a lot of the people who promote this brand of clubbing are also ignoring the natural ebb and flow and rhythms of what a night is supposed to be about, and the fact that, as I did when I played on Saturday, I mean, it's just like when you have sex. You don't start at 120 miles per hour and you don't continue all the time the same way. There's foreplay, there's anticipation, there's the idea of like, you know, really getting into it, and then it does build up to a climax. Absolutely. But it doesn't have to stay there. It can, you know, and I think as a DJ, to be able to illustrate that musically is not something I find easy to do, not least because in most cases, the short attention span crowd really only wants to see someone play for 90 minutes or 2 hours, or wow, 2 hours is long. How am I going to play that long? My set on Saturday was over 7 hours, and I felt I could have gone on much longer, but that'll be for another time.
Well, that's a sign of a night that's gone well, when you don't want to stop playing, you know.
Yeah, but it goes deeper than that. It's not stopping playing. It's more that my approach to it, instead of going for that cheap sensationalism that's a short-term, rush. Again, nothing wrong with a short-term rush, but the thread of all of this really is storytelling. A lot of times when I upload some of the streams that I've done over the last 4 years since the pandemic started, I started streaming very heavily, very regularly. And when I post them, like on SoundCloud or Mixcloud, they have tags. They have a tag system. And when I tag my mixes, I always choose storytelling as the tag, because I think it describes much more adequately what I do, rather than say, oh, I just play tech house, or, oh, wow, I'm just a disco guy. It's like, come on, guys. Like, I realize that for the simple-minded audiences, you need simple-minded, simplistic tags. But I think the way Climax is set up, it encourages exactly the antipodes, the opposite of that. It encourages thoughtfulness in programming, and it's an incredible situation. It's a true privilege, an honor to be asked to program the musical flow of an entire evening like that. And I'm struggling to think of things that are more exciting, because they're so rare. And as a matter of fact, I'm in the process of filming footage that hopefully will come together as a video that I'm going to release, where I'm more or less going to explain to people that, in my opinion, right now, this is the best we got.
Well, that's awesome. That's a fantastic endorsement.
Well, it's not just sort of like me claiming this, boasting. It's really supported by specific observations that have to do with the design of the room, the design of the flow of the dance floor, and so many other things, which I think are certainly never things that people who go to clubs look for or understand, but yet they are very much affected by it somehow. And in my opinion, what I'm trying to express here is that up to now, I really felt that we had kind of lost our ways, because there used to be places such as, like, the Loft on Prince Street, which was not a club, by the way. That was a home. That was David Mancuso's home. Or the Paradise Garage. Those were places where you could truly see that the design and the thoughtfulness in which things were put together had a direct influence on the way the parties were going. And even though for a while Ministry of Sound was really incredible back in 1992, 1993 at the beginning, they changed, and they kind of got rid of the very essence of what had made it so special. And that is because, as most things nowadays, people at the head of big corporations, including clubs, they just want to monetize. The imperative is to get as many bodies as possible through the doors, get the brand as popular and known as possible, and just make as much money as they can. So these are different imperatives. And when I see Climax, it finally brings me back to the idea that now we finally have a benchmark, like a standard to compare to. Like now we have a place where I could tell people, you really think your club is good? Well, then you need to compare it to what's in Bali, and then come back to me and tell me again whether you think your club is that good or not, because that's the level that it's on. In other words, if we don't have something that's really like a shining example of what it needs to be, how are people going to know? And with this, I believe that we definitely have it.
Interesting. So I want to just rewind a little bit. You mentioned about how the scene has changed. You've been around. You're better placed than most to comment on this. So you mentioned that the proliferation of dance music has maybe detracted from the overall quality. What are some of the reasons for that? I mean, you mentioned social media and the kind of how that's changed.
No, it started with super clubs. In other words, the imperative to scale up to as many people as possible made it that, you know, they were astute operators that understood that once they leveraged the promotional power of making certain DJs into stars and associating them with their brand, they could have, you know, subsidiaries or, you know, places all over the world, like not just in one location. So brands like some of the clubs in Ibiza, for example, or some of the clubs in the UK became global brands. And I think that it made total sense to them because their desire was just to share whatever they had with as many people as possible. And in doing that, I think they ignored the basics of what you would call an absorption rate. Because when you have a community of people, it takes a long time for newcomers to get incorporated into that community. And they don't have patience for that. They just want to scale it up as fast as possible. And now, that was in the mid-90s, you know, when Pete Tong, Sachin Digweed, and Paul Oakenfold, and all these British names. I mean, you got to give it to the British. They really had the best PR, the best media handling, and the best ideas for brand building that kind of became global. From a business perspective, it's fantastic. But I would argue that the reason for someone such as myself to be in the music side of things, not the monetization side of things, is because I prefer to not participate in these globalization exercises which come at the expense of authenticity and only be part of events or parties or whatever that retain the authenticity or the initial reason why we decided to do them. And to some degree, I'm not complaining about it. Those who came and made their dollars, they're all gone today. I'm still around.
You're still here.
So I'm not making a lot compared to them, but I'm still as passionate today as I was back when they had these super clubs that came and went.
Have you taken a break throughout your career? Have you taken any like long-term breaks from music?
Not from music. I stopped DJing from 82 to 90 because I was so busy in the studio. I literally, and at that time, DJing was local. There was no travel to speak of. So I couldn't, you know, I was constantly flying all around between London, Sydney, Australia, Dusseldorf, New York, you know, Paris, whatever, and busy in studios. And it just wasn't possible for me to keep the sort of schedule I had become accustomed to, where I was the only person that was a regular guest at David Mancuso's loft, at the Paradise Garage, at Better Days in New York, T. Scott, and also had a residency at Zanzibar in Newark, New Jersey. So throughout 80, 81, 82, I was doing all that, and that was basically like, even though I didn't have my own proper residency at that time, I was constantly helping out or in demand doing all these things for my friends, and I was very, very satisfied with that because these were the very best places there were. But I started traveling so much after I quit the record label I was working for, Prelude, that I couldn't keep that schedule and I wasn't available anymore. So I decided it was better to retire at the top of my game and focus on music for a while. But otherwise, I've always been active because in 87, I started a commercial multi-room recording studio operation that lasted until 2002 or something like that. And, then I started DJing again in 1990. Then in 92, the heavy travel for DJing started, which was new. I started going to Japan, played at Ministry of Sound in July 92 and Brighton Beach and all that. And then it kept going. And by 1996, I had decided to start my own record label, Wave Music. So then by 2003, actually, I decided to switch a little bit into different gears, and I started playing techno. I was the person who made the first mix CD for Sonar, for the Sonar festivals. I played a set there that was really, really interesting, and they decided to make it their first release. So that gave me connection to different things. And while I was doing that, I was also doing deep space with the dub aspect of things. So there's just so much going on, So no, I never stopped. But what I did, however, is that I never really stayed in one place musically. I think I keep moving around to different things. And as a matter of fact, right now, as I say, during the pandemic, I started streaming the first week of March 2020. I started exploring what equipment I needed because I lost all my work. In the space of 3 days, the entire year's worth of booking was gone, and lockdowns. And I was like, okay, then let's figure out what we can do to stay connected with our friends and people whose love of music brought them to want to spend time together. And since we couldn't do it in person, we figured there had to be a way to do it virtually. So by the second week of the pandemic, I was streaming all the time. And 350 shows later, I think it's taught me an enormous amount of things. It's certainly beyond the music. I discovered that what people were really most enamored with was, again, the storytelling. And what I mean by that in this context is that during the streams, I'm on the microphone a lot. And I put out, and you could certainly watch some of these. I posted them on my YouTube channel, where I did interesting hybrid presentations where I would do a DJ set, but while I'm DJing, I'm also talking a lot. Not just, oh, this is this and that song. I would do a real explainer and go in depth and trying to introduce people to the idea that, like, say, for example, I did one show that was called The Roots of House, where I kind of showed people all the records that came before the term house music was coined. But you could argue that these, and there were many, many different kinds of records that led to the appearance of house music and that inspired all the producers in Chicago to make the kind of music that they did. So as soon as I put that online, first of all, we had quite a lot of people on the stream itself, but I also did another one about the history of the label I worked for, Prelude Records. That was an almost 8-hour stream. And many of my luminary friends contributed to that. I got little clips from, Louis Vega, DJ Harvey, and so on and so forth. Everybody that I asked was very happy to contribute little, video segments, or they described their favorite Prelude Records release. I published that online, and the stuff to this day keeps getting viewed like constantly. And the point there is that I discovered that this hybrid way of playing music and while I'm DJing, telling a story was really, really interesting. I did that for Sheffield and LFO bleeps and bass lines, I called it, kind of style. I did it for Miles Davis. I did tribute shows for like Robbie Shakespeare when he passed away, or Bohannon, and many other types of shows like that, where a lot of it was not just so much about streaming of a few records, but it was actually contextualizing, connecting the dots, and explaining what I was doing with these records and how they kind of meant something to the overall dance music culture or music at large. Because, obviously Miles Davis, you can't really say that it was so much connected to dance music itself, but that's never really been my aim. I also did Jimi Hendrix anniversary show, whatever. There's so many things that, are obviously possible once you stream, because you're not limited to making people dance at a certain BPM, as most DJs in clubs feel they are obligated to do these days, because if they don't do that, the club owners get somebody else who can. So that was very liberating. And that gave me the idea that perhaps what I should be expanding into is actually starting to produce documentaries, because not only during the pandemic did I acquire a reasonable set of video and, shooting and editing skills, but also it made me become conscious of the fact that there weren't that many people left in my position with the type of long history and relation with everything that happened in the community, so that I might really do quite good being one of those who spends their time explaining and figuring out how to break it down for people who were not born when a lot of that was happening, and contextualizing it for them and giving them clues as to what it really meant. And the reason why to me that's important is because in some ways, and this is very much related to Climax, I think the very core design elements of Climax point to the idea that there is, in fact, a tradition of clubbing, even though most people might not really be aware of it. I believe that when I see the way Climax is designed, the way the dance floor is all beautiful wood, and the room is treated acoustically, and the speakers are laid out, and the DJ booth and the bar is just pushed back so that it doesn't interfere with what's going on the dance floor, and so many other things like that all come together to create a situation where at least people can reconnect with that original vibe that made dance music as potent and influential as it was in the beginning, before, I would say, arguably, it was corrupted by the monetization imperatives of those operators who didn't care about any of that. They just wanted to cash in on it as much as they could, and they had no regards for either its past or its future beyond what they could earn from it. And I don't feel this is the same with places like Climax. I think I see a direct link, a direct thread between what made it so special and unique in the beginning up until today. And because the surroundings, everything, the environment is conducive to that, I think it stands a much, much better chance of making that happen as a long-term thing and building a community of people around it than other venues that don't have any of these considerations in mind and are certainly unwilling to spend the sort of money that it takes to make it that way.
100% agree. Everything you said is so spot on, and I just need to rewind a bit. So yeah, I absolutely think that you're in such a unique position to tell these stories, and it's so important that you do, because as you said before, I think for the newer generation, so much of this knowledge is lost. And it's really important that I think people return to the roots of it. And you also hit the nail on the head with Climax in terms of building the community. It's not something that's going to happen overnight because of the transient nature of the population of Bali. But we do have a small community of islanders who are regulars, and they're such an important part of the club landscape here, you know.
No. What's going to happen is, as people find out that the place exists, they're going to book their trip to come and watch a specific DJ when they are scheduled to play. I believe that is what's going to happen because, you know, it's really a unique space where the quality of the experience, I mean, for crying out loud, I don't think that they were exaggerating when people reported to me that at the end of my set, there were several people in tears or like completely moved beyond words. Just so that we make it very clear, that wouldn't be possible without the venue being exactly the way it is. That without that environment, that vibe, I would find it very, very difficult to believe that I could achieve the same results. So the point there is that when it all comes together like that, then this is what you can achieve. And I'm really glad we were able to make it happen that way, because even though it's early days, I think it's already more than a proof of concept. And now it's just going to be a matter of people talking about it, word of mouth and whatnot. The word spreads. I mean, there's no question that, you know, when things like that happen, they're impactful enough that people remember, and it is my belief that it's naturally going to expand, and the reach of the venue is going to be way, way beyond the island itself. But what's going to happen is that instead of people coming around and just, you know, by accident bumping into the door of the club, they're going to be coming for the specific reason of going to a certain party or groups of parties at the venue. That's what I believe.
Absolutely. So I just want to ask one question. So you spoke about World of Echoes, you spoke about wave recordings and your club nights. And you mentioned, I saw in your bio something I didn't know about you, that you're an authority on AI. Is that correct?
Well, I've always had a very intimate connection with technology. I was using the internet back in 1984. I was doing digital audio editing and using what became Pro Tools later back in 1988, 89. I was doing, you know, things that no one else was able to do back in 1992 with, you know, digital audio workstations. And I've always really been intimately in the middle of figuring out a way to leverage cutting-edge technologies to make them do something useful for the sake of art and music. I think there are a great many misconceptions when it comes to the use of large language models or programs that leverage those models to, get some sort of artificial intelligence usage applied to specific situations. You could be using these models and programs that know how to talk to them to generate images, to generate video, to generate music, to generate text, or multimodal, combination of multiple types at the same time. And there's no doubt that right now, I don't think you need me to remind you that NVIDIA's stock valuation just passed $2 trillion. And the reason for that is because the chips and GPUs that they make are the very engines that power a lot of the AI computational efforts around the globe, both in training the large language models as much as using these models to create either hosted or local instances where you can interact with the AI in real time. It's dangerous for me to really speak about it too much because I think there's so many misconceptions. The first one being, to most people who've never used any true AI programs, to them it's just one boogeyman. It's like one scary thing. Maybe they don't realize that, like, say, for example, when you have all the different companies, like, obviously OpenAI, but also Anthropic, that makes a different, AI engine called Claude, you may have heard of, and also Google, who now have rebranded their effort as Gemini, and so on and so forth. There's like a whole host of different offerings, and each of them very different from the other, and they each have their own character. And like, say, for example, within OpenAI, there are many sub-projects where there are different LLMs, which means large language model, that are leveraged for specific tasks. For example, one of the LLMs I use is something called Jukebox AI, which was 3 years ago. So I started about 3-4 years ago. One of the first usage of AI that I really became very interested in was automatic or intelligent separation of different components in a track. So this is something that at the beginning was only the province of very, very expensive and fancy efforts, like, say, for example, what was done to the Beatles' Let It Be, where the movie makers kind of built a custom AI engine to extract the parts because they only had a 2-track tape to work from with no multi-track sessions. So they were able to extract all the individual components, so separate the bass from the drums, from the guitar, from the voice, from whatever else, other melodic instruments. But, 4 years ago, there a new open source engine called Spleeter, Spleeter, that came out, and being that it's open source, it means it's free and available to the public, and you can run it on your own machine. It was very low fidelity and not great sounding, but it was already able to take any song and just split it out into 3, 4, or 5 tracks, depending on how you set it. And the results were not all that great, but they were certainly good enough to start working with it. Then within a year or two, different, much higher resolution AI models of track separations became available, including one made by Meta that was called Demucs, Demucs. And Demux was then in turn taken by other companies that built a front end on top of it, like the one I use a lot, which is called RipX by Hit and Mix. But there's others, like, say, for example, the Spectral Layers software does that quite well. So now we have all these separation engines, and now it's to the point where it's becoming incorporated in DJ software, where you could do track separation on the fly pretty much, even though the quality is really mediocre at best. It's always that convenience supersedes quality. So most people that do track separation in DJ software, they obviously don't care that much whether it's going to sound good or not. What they want is push the button, get the result now. And I'm kind of the opposite. I don't like to push the button and get a mediocre result now. I'd rather tell the program to do something and wait an hour and then get an amazing result. That's, we're all different in that respect. So with regards to music generations, I've been experimenting with a program called Jukebox AI that was part of the OpenAI initiative that they also released as somewhat open source. But I've worked with it an enormous amount. Like during the pandemic, I probably did like hundreds and hundreds of hours of music generations, and I have some pretty amazing results. But I've decided for now to not make them public or to share them with anybody except maybe a couple of close friends and advisors. But yeah, I mean, I'm constantly, and I use, Midjourney, but I prefer Stable Diffusion, because Stable Diffusion I can run locally on a machine, whereas with Midjourney, you're forced to deal with an external cloud-based server that makes you pay for it. But there, I'm part of the trusted tester initiative for Google, so I get access to advanced programs that sometimes they let me play with a few weeks or a few months before they come out for the rest of the public. I'm sorry. I mean, you can have whatever opinion you want about that boogeyman, all scary one AI, but I think it's kind of misleading in the sense that most people don't grasp that AI can be many things, and many people are just having very strong opinions about it when they actually have no experience whatsoever interacting with it or knowing what it actually can or cannot do, its limitations, its flaws, as well as what it can really do very well. I'm not part of that crowd. I tend to think that what we're living through right now, we're, talking about August 2024, is really an inflection point. You can mark my words. You can come back to this a few years from now, and you'll realize that what we are living through right now is truly a memorable time where there's no doubt that in the process of this, a bunch of people are going to be left in the dust wondering what the hell happened and why did the train leave and they're still standing on the station, platform. I was never one that crowd, I was never the person who kind of went back and went, oh my God, it used to be so great back then. If anything, I would draw a parallel to what's happening in politics, whether it's with the MAGA movement in America, make America great again, or Brexit, or whatever. There's all these movements are based on nostalgia. They want to go back. They don't want to go forward. They only want to go backwards, because backwards used to be so comfortable, and they don't like the uncertainty of the future. I'm not part of that crowd. And when it comes to music, that means you won't find me being the one that moans about, well, I only want to play vinyl or do any of that. I mean, look, I was playing vinyl 40 years ago. I did great with it. But today is different. And it's up to each and every one of us to leverage the tools that we have at our disposal and to use them in a creative fashion. I just think at large, because most people are not so well acquainted with technology, they find it very daunting, and they tend to react not just with caution, but they're actually suspicious. Not that being suspicious of technology companies is such a bad thing, mind you, because I think a lot of them have very evil intents of what to do with our data in order to monetize it. I'm not, trying to paint a rosy picture of everything, but I think that at large, because technology is so much dominating every aspect of our daily lives, it's important for anyone who wants to stay current, such as myself, to really be acquainted with the way everything works, and that includes AI. I would say that at this moment, some of the most mind-blowing things I've seen happen in the last 2 years were definitely AI related. So I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people who watch this program that wholeheartedly disagree with me, but I would wager that those who do so actually don't know a damn thing about it.
I think that the fear for some creators is, just like you said, push the button and get results now, is a fear of that kind of scene, which has been happening for years with production software and stuff, things like, sample packs and stuff, making it easier, which has maybe kind of detracted from the overall quality of the music's out there. But like you say, if you are creative with it and if you learn it and you understand it, then maybe it's not something to be scared of. It's very interesting to hear your point of view, to be honest.
But, again, charting the arc of a career like mine that goes over almost a half a century, I don't think there's any way I would still be relevant. It was if I was stuck in these sort of backwards approaches of just doing it like we used to, or making this and that great again. I think there's a parallel between politics and our approach to technology. And there are a lot of people who are refusing to get themselves into that because it's disrupting the course of their daily lives. Now, the thing is, at the age where most other people are already kind of retired, may I say, the benefits for me are very obvious, is that I'm full on and I'm looking forward to the challenges of every day, learning new things and constantly absorbing new concepts, new ways of doing things, new approaches, and it's helping me reinvent myself and staying fresh all this time, while still in other ways not skirting the idea that we have an enormous cultural legacy to pass on, and being one of the vehicles, the conduits through which some of that music can be exposed to people, I just try to go across the board, and to some degree when it comes to music, I think that's what a lot of people love about Harvey, is that you can't really pin him down as to playing one specific type of song or style or whatever. I think it's more that, someone like Harvey has an aesthetic, and whatever it takes and wherever it comes from, whatever, he's open-minded enough about it that he'll expose it and he'll play it. And to me, Climax is the perfect vehicle for that to be exposed, shared, and enjoyed in the setting that it is. And I'm just feeling so blessed I was able to participate a little bit in what hopefully is just the beginning of something that's going to really be very impactful to our entire dance music culture.
Well, I'm sure you'll be back. Now, there's so much more I could ask you, but I'm mindful you've got a flight to catch. So last question then, and I'll let you go. Is where are you headed next?
I'm going to Japan.
Are you playing?
Yeah.
Where will you be playing?
I'll be playing in a whole bunch of places. I mean, it's a big tour. I'm all over the map. I play in Japan constantly. It's almost my biggest market. So I'm sorry for not offering specifics, but I'll be all over the place. I'll be in Hokkaido. I'm playing several places in the north. I'm playing in Tokyo. I'm playing in the south a little bit. And, it'll be my third time in Japan this year. I've played in Japan steadily since 1992, so that makes it 32 years of at least going there 2 or 3 times a year on the average. Multiply 32 by 3 or 2 even. I've at least been in Japan 65 or 70 times in the last 30 years. So I do whatever I'm asked to do, and I'm always finding the Japanese audiences especially discerning, truly open-minded, and not stuck in specific expectations as I see so many other more successful commercial places be. For example, maybe let's take the question another way. And maybe for another talk, you can ask me, why haven't you played in Ibiza for the last 5 years? And I could answer that question when you ask it to me another time, but not today.
Okay. All right. Well, look, I'm going to let you go and catch your flight. Thank you so much for your time. That was fascinating and lots to unpack there. But yeah, thank you so much, Francois. Safe travels. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.